My name is Max Gagliardi, and you're listening to the Talk Energy Podcast. If you're watching this video, take a moment, hit the subscribe button on YouTube, or you can follow me on your favorite podcast app, leave a review, help me out. This episode's guest is Tom Slocum. Tom is Vice President of Trifecta Solutions, where he has a focus on helping producers with plug and abandonment operations, as well as a suite of other oilfield consulting services. Tom is also running for the open seat on the Texas Railroad Commission and has been campaigning the last few months. I met Tom about a year ago on the Clubhouse app and always had respect for the passion that he brought to his arguments and his willingness to put himself out there. And regardless of how you feel about his politics, I feel like there's a certain level of respect that I have to give to somebody that's willing to put himself on the front line for his cause. This episode's filled with discussions about Texas's energy policy and what Tom would do if he was elected to the Railroad Commissioner seat. We talk about the current issues that Texas is facing and ways that we could level the playing field between green energy and traditional energy sources. Hope you enjoy the show. Tom, welcome to Talk Energy. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Max. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, we met probably like around sometime last year. We were on Clubhouse. I think that's the first time we came across each other, and you were getting real active on that app, and it's kind of died down a little bit. I don't know if I'm not on it as much anymore, but I've been doing more Twitter spaces. But I remember you specifically because you were very outspoken, very passionate about your positions on there, and you're also just like not afraid to just like jump in the lion's den. Like that's the one thing I remember specifically was you just getting in there and mixing it up, getting in on like climate rooms and rooms where people had very different viewpoints and not necessarily trying to pick a fight, but really just trying to educate people and show them your perspective. And I just thought, man, this guy's got some guts to do that. And then fast forward to today, now you're running for the Railroad Commission seat that's open, and you are now putting yourself out there even more. And so the first thing I just want to ask you about is like, it takes a lot of guts to do what you're doing as somebody that's in the public eye. More recently, because of the podcast, I get like attacked a lot, and it's like not always the easiest thing to put yourself out there, man. How do you do it, and where does this passion come from?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, Max. When you put yourself out there, you're opening yourself up to criticism from everyone, and no doubt there will always be people ready, waiting in line to criticize every word that comes out of your mouth, whether it's a post about eating a burrito at Allsups or whatever it might be. If you want to try to have fun, people are going to jump on it. And then if you want to actually talk hard policy positions, people are going to jump on it too. So it's I get criticized by wind lobbyists in Austin because I want to see Texas have bonding statewide for wind power. And on Twitter, it's funny, people usually on Twitter are ragging on you for, something silly or stupid. But I've got the attention of all the big wind lobbyists now, in fact, on Twitter, and they're lining up to try to take me down. But it's fun. I don't mind arguing with people. I enjoy talking about policy. And when I'm doing that, I'm having fun. And you've probably noticed that on Clubhouse. I will definitely go toe-to-toe with people now on Twitter Spaces. Any public forum at all where energy policy is being discussed, I'd love to be a part of the conversation because I think that Texans really need to show how powerful we are in oil and gas and what we are planning to do here for the future and how we're going to prepare ourselves for that when we're talking about what's going on in D.C. If we don't do a better job of defending the industry and entering the lion's den, like you say, we're going to end up being regulated by D.C. So we need strong leaders that are willing to speak up. And that's really why I got in this race. I didn't see that coming from the current railroad commissioners. You see a lot of rhetoric, but you don't see action. And you don't see people willing to go toe-to-toe with these lobbyists and take on the green energy lobbyists that have inundated Austin and have really started paying off Republicans to get what they want. And I'm going to stand up to those people and say, hey, this is not okay. This is not kosher. Something needs to be done.
Well, we're going to get into like the Railroad Commission stuff, and I want to talk about that on the back half. Honestly, man, the first part of this, I just want to talk to you about kind of the advocacy work you were doing even before that. And was this like something that you'd always been doing, or was there something that snapped, or did it happen gradually over time where you decided, like somebody has to be vocal and speak up, and I feel like I'm somebody that can do that. And just personally for me, it's been difficult to make, myself more outspoken about things. I think when I first started getting on social media, I was nervous, scared, didn't want to be, to put it out there, wanted to be more PC around some of the narratives. And then I just saw things the way they were going and decided, you know what, if you have a voice, there's kind of some responsibility. But how did you get to this point? Was it just something you've always been doing, or was what was the process of it?
It's funny, man. About 12 years ago, a guy I was working with at Apache Corporation said, "Hey, you don't know this, but one day you're going to run for railroad commissioner, and you'll have to apologize." I'm working in a working office right now. We've got a trucking company, so we've got people coming in and out.
No worries.
But the genesis for all of this really began when I was operating a field in Fort Stockton, and there was an orphaned well just offset to us, and this orphaned well was causing problems with the water flood that we were putting in. And I was really concerned about this water flood affecting this orphaned well, because if oil from our water flood started coming out of this orphaned well, the value of our proposition here, this field that we were water flooding, would not only go to zero, it would probably go to negative. We probably would have seen a lawsuit out of it. And so that was in 2016, 2017. And that's when I first realized that the state of Texas was really behind the ball plugging orphaned wells, and that something needed to be done about it. And so I contacted Senator Ted Cruz's office. I contacted state senators, state reps. I did everything I could to bring attention to this issue and say, hey, why are we way behind the ball, 6,000 orphaned wells? And some of these wells, like the one that was affecting our lease that was just off lease, that one is what you call a P13 well. And in Texas, if an orphaned well has what's called a P13 filed on it, where the landowner is technically responsible for the P&A, the state of Texas, by law, will not spend any money on that well. And so you end up with a lot of holes in the ground, literally holes in the ground, no casing, no wellhead. And it's a sight to see for anyone that hasn't seen it. And it bothers me because I definitely don't want liberals coming down here and saying, oh, look at Texas, they can't handle their mess. I want to clean this up as fast as possible so we don't get a bunch of negative PR coming at us all day long. And that's the reason I decided the best thing to do would be to follow the advice given to me by people that work for Ted Cruz, who I'm sure spoke to Senator Ted Cruz and said, Tom, this is the best thing you can do, is to start a nonprofit and work on building this thing up. And it's a federal tax deduction, right? So some people in the Republican Party are hesitant to work with nonprofits. I am not when it comes to plugging wells, because that's money that's coming out of the federal government in D.C., not coming from the state of Texas. So at the end of the day, nonprofits that plug wells, orphaned wells, which there's 3 of them in Texas, not just the one I started, it's a good thing for Texas because it saves Texas money. It saves taxpayers money ultimately. And so that's the genesis really for all of this, is I noticed there was a major problem with the Railroad Commission with the orphaned wells. But then the freeze happened last year and $3.4 billion bailout happened. And I have yet to find a single Republican in Texas running for office, whether they're running for state rep or running for state senator or any office, dog catcher for that matter, that says that a $3.4 billion bailout going on our natural gas bill is a good idea, especially when we took in $15.8 billion worth of revenue last year. So when that happened, and I realized that fiscal conservatives, they call themselves fiscal conservatives in Austin, were taxing Texans instead of working with inside their budget, I noticed that was a major problem. And I got to mention that at the Odessa Country Club at a state Senate forum just last week. And all 3 state Senate candidates agreed with me and explained to a room of 300 people for 6 minutes that Tom Slocum is correct and that Wayne Christian was not acting in a fiscal conservative manner when he voted for that, because the railroad commissioners had to vote for that too. People are saying, well, railroad commission doesn't get to vote on things that affect the state. Oh, yes, they do. Oh, yes, they do. And Wayne Christian calls it securitization. That's his name for this tax. Securitization is the fancy name they came up for this, so people in Texas wouldn't realize it's a tax. Well, I got news for you. People in Texas, we're not stupid. We know a tax when we see one, and that's a tax.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, like for people that, most people are oil and gas or, energy, but I do have some broader energy listeners. I've got listeners kind of on the investment side or the finance side too. So for people that don't know, this is plug and abandoning wells. A well is drilled. At the end of the day, when that well is done with its productive and useful life cycle, somebody has to take care of that land and get it back to the way that it was, and also make sure that there's no environmental issues with those wells. And in places really all over the place, but specifically places like Texas, where you've just got such a huge amount of wells that have been drilled, these issues are going to be there forever. Somebody's got to be taking care of this, and it just seems like things can slip through the cracks. I see some stuff on Twitter, and it's like you watch, like, for example, this the Chevron deal. They had the red bucket thing that went on a while back, and you see kind of these wells that are having a blowout or spewing out brine water or whatever it may be. Is it really as bad as it looks on these posts, or is it being sensationalized? Are these the exception and not the rule? Or what is the scope and scale of the problem?
Yeah, oftentimes a messenger could try to sensationalize what's actually happening and blow it out of proportion. I try to keep things very factual. And I was just having coffee this morning with a reporter who had spoken to Wayne Christian in the same coffee shop last week about how much money had been spent. And Wayne Christian told this reporter that they had already spent $5 million of taxpayer money trying to plug this saltwater blowout geyser, which is very concerning to me. Very concerning if we have an orphaned well that is actually sitting on an active lease, and they're wanting the Railroad Commission, the taxpayers, to pick up the tab for this. That's a major problem. And so we got to insert fiscal responsibility back into the equation. So if we're going to blow taxpayer money plugging something that is really the responsibility of an operator, I've got issue with that. And so it's up to us sometimes to figure out, if there's a blowout situation and our taxpayer money is being spent on it, it's almost the responsibility of the taxpayer half the time to find out, well, is this really an orphaned well, or is this the responsibility of an operator? And if you're an operator and you have a lease assignment, Max, I think you probably know a little bit about landman and terminology and that. But when you go to purchase a lease, you get a lease assignment. And on that assignment, you have all these well bores. They're all listed down there. And even if you've got a plug well bore on your lease, guess what? That's your responsibility according to the assignment. And so if you're the only operator that's ever been on that lease, which in this case in Crane County, it was Gulf and then it was Chevron. If that's the case, if that's a situation, then you're going to be responsible for those well bores. And if anything goes wrong with them, you're going to have to come back and plug them again. It's all very legal, and it has to do with your assignment, and it has to do with the operator there on location. Now, if there is no operator, if there is no active lease, and it's truly an orphaned well situation, then yes, our taxpayer money will be spent out of the Orphan Well Cleanup Fund at the Railroad Commission. But if it's an active lease with an active operator on there, and our taxpayer money is subsidizing an operator for something that they should be handling, I definitely have issue with that as a fiscal conservative. I do not want our taxpayer money being spent where it should be, because if that happens, this $5 million, if it's taxpayer money, like Wayne Christian says, that we've spent on this thing to the tune of over $5 million, and keep in mind, this thing isn't even plugged yet. Okay, they're going to be out there for weeks more on end working on this well at the government's dime. All right, if that's the case, and the total bill for this thing is $7, $8, $10 million, that's money that could have been spent plugging other orphaned wells. So if an operator is really responsible for that, they should be paying. Sorry about that, but that's the situation.
So, it's like you've got this huge issue with the orphan wells, the plug and abandonment liabilities. It's not the only issue that Texas faces from an energy standpoint. It's really interesting because Texas has this massive amount of resource that that they can utilize. Obviously, it's oil and gas. You've also got the infrastructure side on the petrochemicals and all these things in terms of the Gulf and everything that Texas does. Yet you also have this huge faction of Texas that's moving into the green direction, or quote unquote green direction, with wind energy. I've seen some huge solar farms just driving down to Austin and some other places. There's one that you drive by. I don't know what it's called. I've seen some massive ones going in. How do you look at the different issues that Texas faces? It's clearly the energy capital of the U.S. and maybe some would argue the energy capital of the world. What are some of the other issues that you're thinking about and looking at for the state?
Yeah, well, when it comes to green energy and it comes to all these different energy sources, I want to make sure we have a level playing field more than anything. If the government is busy subsidizing these new forms of energy, we have to keep track of that, because that's our money being spent on this green energy. And probably the biggest problem I have is the bonding issue. And I believe firmly that windmills should be bonded in Texas. It's okay to have alternate forms of energy. I've seen all kind of really interesting stuff where you use this green energy to help create more energy. And so, for example, Professor Joe Dancy at SMU, you might be familiar with Joe. He's a great guy, very brilliant man. He showed me this concept called pump storage a couple of years ago. And that's an interesting concept. You take water and you pump it up on top of these mesas that we have out here, and you create an artificial waterfall. And it's like a hydroelectric dam. So the water falls using gravity straight down the pipes, turns a turbine, creates electricity. That's a great thing. And then at night, you use the green energy sources from solar or from wind, and you use that power to pump the water back up to the top of the mesa. And so you have more energy. I'm not against alternate forms of energy. I want a level playing field more than anything.
Right.
And so we get attacked in oil and gas constantly. They want to raise our bonding levels. There's people in Congress that have called California representatives, representatives from New York, from liberal places. They want to try to do everything they can to hurt Texas oil and gas. If they can raise bonding level amounts to $150,000 or $200,000 per well, they would do it tomorrow. But at the same time, they're calling for zero bonding for things like wind farms and for things like solar fields. And they want to shut oil and gas down in Texas, right? And I will not let that happen. I really think if we don't have a level playing field in Texas, that, it's not going to benefit Texans. Texans are at the top of the food chain here. Texans, the voters, they want to make sure that we have the right policy. And I don't think any Texan would agree with lobbyists in D.C. and in New York and California when it comes to the bonding. But I can tell you right now, I'm one of the only Republicans that's very outspoken on this issue of bonding and making sure that we have a level playing field and making sure that small counties in West Texas don't get stuck with the bill. I've heard a story, I haven't confirmed it, that there was a wind farm in Oklahoma that has already gone defunct. You live in Oklahoma, maybe you've heard about this. But if a wind farm goes bankrupt, somebody has to go there and clean up the mess. And it's $450,000 to take down one of these windmills that's probably killed thousands of birds, by the way. You want to talk about environmental harm, right? So we have to look out for Texans and make sure they don't get stuck with the bill for a defunct wind farm, especially in these small counties in West Texas. Some of them are tiny counties, and they're not going to have the money to deal with this, right? You're talking about a lot more money to take down a windmill than to plug an oil well. Usually it's about $25,000 or $35,000 to plug an oil well. So I'm trying to look out for Texans here and do the right thing. And I think deep inside everybody's hearts, they know that allowing windmill companies, big wind, to have zero bonding or low bonding, very low bonding in some cases, that's just simply not the right thing to do.
Yeah, well, it gets back to this. You say you want a level playing field. That's kind of code word for free market solutions, right? I mean, a way to where we can facilitate energy growth and energy innovation through a free market way, to where we're not having central planners who are picking the winners and trying to pick the losers too if they had their way. And I think that when you see that, you see a lot of waste, a lot of, I don't know, maybe corruption is too powerful of a word, but I think you see corruption in there. I think you also see just inefficiencies. And so it's not a good outcome. One example, you mentioned Oklahoma with wind farms. I don't know of the one that went bankrupt. It doesn't surprise me. And I'm actually really curious to hear, I'd love to see someone do some analysis on that. We could call it the plug and abandonment cost of a windmill being so high, so much higher than that of a well, because that's got to factor into the cost of the energy the full life cycle. I doubt that many are looking at that cost or factoring it in the wind levelized cost of energy calculations. I'd be shocked if they were. But the thing I have heard in Oklahoma are things like giant wind farms getting built out, and I know of one specifically where you've got about half the capacity that is effectively constrained via poor planning on the transmission side. And so even whenever the wind is going, at the highest rate that it can to support the total amount of capacity, you're still seeing curtailments on this wind farm, and it just seems incredibly inefficient. And again, that's anecdotal. I don't have the numbers behind it, but it's someone who's close to the situation has told me about it. And so it just gets back to this whole thing around, can we centrally plan all these energy sources, or do we just need to make sure that we have the most efficient type of marketplace and free market capitalism structures that can allow the winners to come up from in terms of providing the best economic outcome for the consumers?
Exactly, Max. That's what it's really all about, right? Having a real free market. And if you don't have a real free market, it's not going to be the best situation for the voters and for the taxpayers, because you're going to have something out of balance there. And if you don't have free market solutions with this level playing field that I keep speaking about, ultimately it's going to cost people money, and you may not see the ramifications immediately, and you may not know the details. But like you said, it looks like these wind farms are just throwing up windmills as fast as they can, regardless of how much power is actually going to be able to be deployed from it, right? And so there's probably an incentive there for them just to slap up as many of these things as possible as fast as they can. And when it comes toward actually what the benefits are for the consumer and the benefits are for the state, they get away with doing this under the green energy and everything's perfect, but the efficiency factors are not being looked at close enough. And if we don't have professionals like yourself and other people in this industry, in the oil and gas industry, in the energy industry, start looking in and doing a deeper dive into what these big wind companies are doing, the corruption will just grow and grow and grow. And that's not what we need. We need these people held accountable. There's lots of people out there to spend their days, they get paid to keep oil and gas in check, right? They want to make sure everything we do is perfect. How many people, Max, are out there trying to keep wind farms and wind companies in check, right? That's not in vogue, right?
Yeah.
We should make that a deal. It should be in vogue. Republicans across the nation really should be doing everything they can to make sure that these subsidized projects are benefiting people, the taxpayers, whether it's in Oklahoma or Wyoming or Texas. Every Republican in the nation should be going down into the details of these big projects, because these windmills, they don't last 50, 60, 70 years like a oil well will typically. There's lots of oil wells that will last way longer, 70, 80 years. But a windmill typically lasts about 25 years. It has a lot of stress. The wind's sitting here blowing it around doing this number. At some point, that stress is going to give way, and you're going to have a fault, and you're going to have a problem. You're going to have a failure. So those things require lots of maintenance. I can't tell you how many times I've driven past one of these wind farms and seen some of them blowing 100 miles an hour, turning and spinning, but then quite a few of them completely turned off. And it just makes you wonder, how efficient is this if the maintenance isn't being done, if it's actually killing our wildlife? There's people that get paid money to drive around and pick up birds that have died, and that's their sole job.
I mean, it's funny. I laugh about the bird thing, but I'm not making this up. Driving down I-35 there by the Arbuckles, I saw a big bird just get smacked by one of these windmills, and I was on the phone on a work call, on conference call, so you could, I had witnesses at the time. I said, "Oh my God, I just saw this bird just get crushed by a windmill," and everyone was laughing. They were like, "I thought that was just like a thing that people said," and I was like, "Well, I just saw it. I don't know how common it is, but certainly, I mean, whether it's birds getting hit by them or whether it's just the scarring of the landscape as you look out. I mean, that used to be one of the most beautiful drives in Oklahoma, and now you drive and the landscape is, pretty much completely altered in terms of the way that it looks. I have a hard time believing people in Colorado or, New Mexico or some of these states where they have these gorgeous, mountains and terrain. We don't have as much of it here in Oklahoma, and one of the only mountain ranges we have, or hill ranges we have, I guess you'd call it, is covered in windmills now. I don't see that going over real well for some, kind of a historic place in one of these other states. I don't know how they deal with it. The other thing you said that's interesting is that these wind companies, green energy companies, it's like, what standards are they being held to? And I had a ESG consulting, or kind of I guess that would be what they would be called. They really help. It was a consulting firm that works with oil and gas companies around dealing with environmental issues or helping with projects. They also helped with messaging and communications. And I asked them, I said, with this, rise of investment in renewables, I said, are you guys picking up a lot of clients in that space? And they said, not really. They're not really facing the same issues that oil and gas is facing. And I just thought that struck me as very odd that they wouldn't be held to even in higher standard, right? I mean, look, if your business model is that I'm cleaner, better, greener, that's the whole selling point. I mean, yes, they say it's cheaper and all these things, but let's face it, the main selling point is that they're cleaner, better, and greener, yet they're not being held to even close to the same
And so our leaders in Austin, I'm very interested. I just talked to a reporter about it this morning on the phone. I said, we really need to do a deep dive on every Republican in Texas and who's taking money from Big Wind. I promise you there are Republicans taking money from Big Wind. All right, Big Wind has these people in their back pockets already. I haven't taken any money from them. I am ready to hold them accountable, and if you send me to Austin, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Not only am I going to hold these wind companies accountable, but I'm going to hold everybody in Austin accountable when it comes to our money. But if Wayne Christian is out there preaching that the Green New Deal is a bad thing, but then he's not doing everything he can to make sure we have bonding statewide for these, I mean, just talking out of the side of your mouth, man. Like you're saying one thing and doing another. You're saying you don't want all this subsidized energy to come into Texas, but what are you doing about it? Are you fighting? Are you actually trying to stop these people from coming in here and leaving us with all these terrible windmills that pollute our landscape, and kill all these birds? What are you doing about it? I can talk about how bad these things are all day long, right? But if I'm elected, I can actually do something about it. So the people that are elected in Austin that call themselves conservative Republicans, if they're not actually fighting the fight and they're taking money from Big Wind, hey, you got to call a jack and a spade a spade. If they're taking money from these people and they're not doing anything about it, that's a big problem. And I hate to say it, but I bet you if you go deep down and look at this stuff, they're all taking money from them at some point.
Well, to be fair, there's a lot of money that flows in from the oil and gas
industry.
There is. Well. So
there is.
I like the talking point. But what I like more than that, because I think that it happens across the board. This is just how politics works. Let's not kid ourselves here, right? There's special interest groups, there's lobbyists, there's people that funnel money from industry to these politicians in different ways, right? But that being said, I think transparency is the key message point from that last segment that you just did. I think that if there is transparency around it, and then also just getting back to look, if you're going to advocate over here and give an advantage, then we need to make sure that we're looking at everything fairly, which that's the part that I don't think that the playing field is level. To switch topics a little bit, some of the things I originally heard you talk about a lot was last year, kind of right after the February storm, were, ideas, criticisms, suggestions around ERCOT in the grid. Kind of go open mic here on your thoughts of the current state of ERCOT, everything that's going on now, what, if anything, has changed in a year since then, and then I'll go into some more questions on that.
Well, the people that were appointed to the board of ERCOT before we had the freeze were appointed by Greg Abbott. A lot of them were not from Texas. Surprise, surprise. Why would you put people not from Texas in charge of our electricity? That's obviously a problem. But then you also look at who he's appointed now. Okay, so you have the same guy that appointed the last group. He's appointed this new group. Now, they might be from Texas, but what kind of decisions are going to be made? Are these really good people when it comes time for a catastrophe as far as ERCOT and their control of our grid? I don't know if they're good people, if they're the right people for the job or not. And I hate to say it, but it's almost like you got to wait for something bad to happen and see how they're going to react. They can say all day long, we're going to look out for Texans and do what's right. But if we end up in another situation where they're going to turn off power, ERCOT's going to say, hey, we have to turn off power over here and turn off power over there, and then there's a pay-for-play where there's a bailout happening for $3.4 billion on the back end and the taxpayers are picking up the bill. Whoa, we got to pump the brakes on all of that and see, why is this happening? Why is this money just being out of thin air all of a sudden going to show up because we entered into a catastrophe? It was Rahm Emanuel, I think, that made the point, never let a good crisis go to waste. And the longer I look at this, the longer I see dollar signs and I see money flying around. And it's not to benefit Texans. It's to benefit people that were a part of that decision-making process. And so I really don't think that the people at ERCOT at the time were looking out for Texans in the best manner, in the best possible way. And I'm very skeptical about the people that Governor Abbott has appointed to this board just because of his history and what he's done before. Not a single person that Abbott had appointed to that board stayed on. They all resigned, all of them, in disgrace. And so it just really concerns me whether or not we have the right leadership in those positions and how those people got there to begin with. What was the relationship, and who are the people there now, and what are their relationship with Governor Abbott, and what's their political background? Who do we have running our power grid in Texas? That's a big question that the media really needs to do a deep dive on to make sure that these people are going to make the right decisions. And I wish people would take a much closer look at these ERCOT appointees. But when it comes to the Railroad Commission and it comes to keeping the natural gas moving in Texas, we definitely have to do a better job at that. North Dakota, they move gas all the time, right? And they're not experiencing huge, massive decreases in their gas production like we experienced here in Texas.
Right.
And so we can do a better job, and we will do a better job. There's no question about that. But if we don't listen to experts that are brought into the Railroad Commission, like Ted Wooten, if you look at Ted Wooten on LinkedIn, I strongly support everybody look up Ted Wooten, last name W-O-O-T. And Ted was hired by the Railroad Commission. I know Ted. He's a really good guy, very knowledgeable, extremely smart person. He was hired to be the director of critical infrastructure. And if he's telling people at the Railroad Commission, we need to do X, Y, Z to be prepared for the next freeze, then we need to be doing X, Y, Z. You shouldn't question experts. When you hire experts and you're paying them that much money to come in and tell you how to fix the system, you have to listen to them. Also, I mean, people are aware, people aren't, but there's an interesting person at the Railroad Commissioner that's the director over there. His name is Wong Wei, or Wei Wong. I'm sorry, I may have that backwards, but he was brought in to be the director, and he gets paid over $200,000 to run basically the Railroad Commission, to be the director to a certain degree. And, you know, none of this is falling back on him. And I have really serious issues with someone there that's not willing to take responsibility and accountability for what happened there and try to make things better. And so we have these high-paid bureaucrats at the Railroad Commission who may or may not be qualified, making big-time decisions, and there's no accountability for these decisions. That's a problem. And so I'm happy Ted Wooten is there. I think that there probably needs to be some more house cleaning at the Railroad Commission and make sure we do have the proper people in place there so we don't run into this position again. I don't want to have to be forced to do another $3.4 billion bailout. But if we get put in that position again, we're going to have to do it. But I guarantee you, I will never vote to tax Texans for it. We will work within our budget if it happens again. But, like I said, I will do everything possible to make sure we never end up in that situation to create another bailout situation. I don't know if the Republicans in Austin are going to work as hard as me on that. Maybe there were people that benefited from that bailout. Maybe they're okay if it happens again, right? Maybe there's certain people in Austin that were happy, fine, and dandy with writing themselves a check with $3.4 billion, right? So once that gravy train happens and you set precedent on a bailout, Louis Gohmert told me the other day, he said, son, it all started with the TARP bailouts. But W did $700 billion. You know what happened right after that, Max, when Obama got into office? They did a $900 billion bailout. So you start setting precedent with bailouts, and that money starts flowing through Austin, that is a bad, bad case for future bailouts. You're setting precedent. This cannot happen again. It cannot happen. We have to prepare ourselves. We have to keep it from happening again. I will do that if I'm there.
Sure. So you hit on a lot of things. One thing you talked about at the beginning was Greg Abbott and appointing these new ERCOT board or whatever they're called, whatever their title is. I think that I would hope that you got to think this is like a high pressure appointment for him, given the failures of last year. You would think that he would given this is an issue that I think could have pretty big impacts on his popularity. Or, I would think that this is something he would be very focused on. It would be, odd to me to think that he wouldn't have taken these very seriously, but I think it's just going to play out, I mean, we'll see. It's like anytime you get these bureaucrats, like I love the word bureaucrat and putting it into this context because these are unelected people that have, very, very, a lot of power that can make sweeping changes or decisions that can affect the lives of everyday people. It's just odd, right? It's like you got unelected people here that can actually affect you and did last year, and it was in a very physical and visceral way. Like people lost power to their houses. They were not,
people died. Yeah, over 200 people died
in bad got in bad situations. Had to deal with it. So this is a real impact. I think that this is why it's important when we have these elections for things like the Railroad Commission, and we'll talk more about that at the end because I know that's probably part of the thing, the reason why you're doing a lot of this PR stuff right now, but I think this is why this is important. And regardless of whether people agree with everything that you say or everything that the other guys are saying, I think having the discussion and getting that out there is important because this is an election and elections have consequences. But before we move into more of the railroad stuff, which we'll hit on kind of in the last segment, just talk about the oil and gas industry in general. And I know this is a little broader, but it seems like we've really lost the messaging, and it's something that I've been trying to be better about. I know that whenever I heard you speak on like the clubhouses and the spaces, you were passionate about this. How do we lose the messaging, and what do we need to do? Is it guys like yourself that are getting out there? But I mean, what other things can we do as an industry to continue to show people that we're bringing a lot of good into the world? I just feel like this is a topic that you're passionate about.
Well, we need young people that aren't afraid to step into the ring like you, Max. You spoke about at the beginning of this. You said I was hesitant to do it, but then I jumped in, and you've got to get educated on the facts first so you know what you're talking about. And then you've got to jump in there right. And you got to start fighting. You got to start throwing punches because these people spend millions of dollars. George Soros, Carbon Tracker, the list is long. They spend money all day long. Right. They have professionals, Max, that's their only job. We need more professionals like you, Max, and like J.P. Warren, right. And the people that are out there swinging the big sticks. And if we have that, then we will be able to fight back against this narrative that they're pushing on a daily basis that oil and gas is here to destroy the world. That's simply not true. We're here to bring energy freedom. We're here to bring independence. And the best way I can describe that is look at the situation in Iraq and Kurdistan. In Iraq, they have all this flared gas. And they decided we're not going to allow this. We're going to end flared gas in Iraq. We're going to outlaw it. And they're working as fast as they can there. But Kurdistan took it even further. Kurdistan, they're at the whim of Baghdad. Baghdad can turn their power off in Kurdistan whenever they want to. Kurdistan is this region, for everybody that doesn't know, in northern Iraq that is autonomous, and they recognize themselves as their own country separate from Iraq, even though they're within Iraq, right? And they're trying to do everything they can to restore democracy. They want voting there. The only way you get democracy and people voting there is they have to live there, number one. They have to create money. They have to have income. They have to have an economy. And if you have your electricity being cut off at night, every night, it's really hard to operate your glass manufacturing facility that operates 24/7 or whatever widget is that you're making, right? So what do they need in Kurdistan? They need electricity 24/7. So they took it a step further than the president of Iraq, I guess, if you want to call him that. They took it a step further, and they said, here in Kurdistan, we are going to totally outlaw flaring of gas. The gas that is coming out of the ground either has to be converted to electricity immediately, or it has to be pumped back into the ground to store it, because we only have so many resources at the end of the day. But that gas that was being flared is bringing them the energy freedom, that natural gas, even though it might be sour and have some sulfur in it, just like the gas out here in West Texas, that's allowing the people in Kurdistan to vote. That's allowing people to have houses, to own businesses, right? And so the more energy freedom you spread around the world, the more money there is to be made, and the better situation it's going to be for the economy, for trade, for the whole 9 yards. And you will be able to keep people there, living there, so they can show up to vote. But if you don't have any of that and you control the power, which literally, some people are like, is that figuratively, like controlling the power structure? No, actually controlling the electricity, right? If you have a dictator in a country that can control the electricity, like in Venezuela or in other countries, you can control the people. And that is where oil and gas saves the world and brings democracy, because we're going to deliver power to everyone on as cheap and as reliable as possible, and that is what makes the world spin, and that's what delivers freedom.
Yeah, and I think that the U.S., the reason why we're not in the situation that like Europe and others are in around these dramatically rising energy costs, obviously the price of oil has been going up, but natural gas has been more manageable versus some other places, and it's because we have, again, it gets back to this free market solution. We have royalty owners that have private property rights that can own the minerals, and then therefore they can work with companies like oil and gas companies to come and exploit those minerals and build out the necessary infrastructure. And then we have a marketplace that has more access to energy, and the energy becomes cheaper. This is just capitalism 101. And so when you look at what makes us the number one superpower in the world around energy, I would argue, and I don't know, maybe there's experts that would argue against me, I would argue it all boils down to personal property rights and freedoms, right? We have the right to own our minerals. We have the right to get them and produce those minerals. And other places in the world, most places don't have that. And so it just gets back to oil and gas is such to all the reasons you mentioned, too. I'm not going to get this on a raw oil and gas speech about how it's this amazing thing. So you can follow me on Twitter, listen to the podcast, and hear me talk about that all the time. But it gets back to this element of, it is, it's the basis of sovereignty, which is what you were alluding to in the last segment that you just went on. And then the other thing is that if you look at the green movement or the environmentalist movement, there is a very heavy, strong undertone to kind of dismantle our current systems and to put these new systems in place. And ultimately, I don't know that it really matters, the economics behind these initiatives, because when you want to really be cynical about it, you look at it and you say, well, this is going to cause energy prices to go up, which is then going to drive more social and government programs to help subsidize that. It all just kind of has this socializing of the energy complex theme. And that is sort of the antithesis or the opposite of this free market theme, which is the reason why we're the leader in the world. So Doomberg put out a good piece this morning. If you get a chance, you should read it. But there's a line in there where he says, it's like, look, basically all these policies, shutting down nuclear plants and coal, stopping new leases.
Yeah, they're removing
offshore,
baseload power
trying
as
to
fast
stop,
as they can, really. They are. They're removing the baseload power, and that's a problem.
Trying to stop, critical infrastructure projects. These are all, if our enemies could design a strategy, it would be, this is exactly what they would design. So whether that's the intent or not, it's driving us to a less energy secure future. And I think having the discussions like we're having and promoting the industry and shedding a light on these things with facts, like you mentioned, which I think is important, is the best way to do it. All right, so pivoting to the Railroad Commission stuff, you're clearly running. Before we go into kind of your sales pitch at the end, sorry, I just remembered one more thing. You got the laser eyes on Twitter. You've talked about Bitcoin mining, as a solution. I'm assuming, I think I've seen you put this out there, as a solution that we could potentially go in and help with some of these orphan wells or wells that need to be plugged and abandoned. Just your thoughts on Bitcoin mining.
Yeah, I mean,
quick.
Bitcoin mining, prices fluctuate with Bitcoin, and when it does, people are always to jump on it. Oh, Bitcoin's down. Oh, this stuff isn't economical, right? They always try to make that argument over and over again. But the fact of the matter is that if you're taking gas that was literally being lit on fire, that is energy. You might as well be taking money and throwing it into a fireplace. Right. I mean, and so, yeah, you are. We're literally lighting our money on fire whenever we flare gas. And that's not good. That's not efficient. And if you're an engineer and you were taught anything, you were taught to refine things to make them more efficient. Because when you do, you add money to the bottom line, right? And so going back to almost the win argument, you could say the same thing. We're not doing a good job being efficient and studying exactly what it is that we're doing. So if we're going to waste all this energy, why? Why do that? Is that in the best interest of the taxpayers, the mineral owners, the consumers of electricity, the consumers of natural gas? Of course it's not. That doesn't make us stronger when we burn a resource and just let it go. We need to capture these resources
Right.
as best we can and convert them into electricity. So when we do have another freeze, we can maybe say, hey, we're going to turn off all these Bitcoin miners over here for 3 or 4 days while everything's frozen over. You can stop mining for 3 or 4 days in the year, and you're not going to ruin your Bitcoin mining business, especially if electricity prices are through the roof. It's a free market scenario takes over, and you're just going to be able to put your power back onto the grid. But what we have to do in Texas is we have to make it easier for companies to take their flare gas and turn it into electricity. And so if we need to streamline the regulations for that, we need to. And number one thing we need to do that is eliminate the flare gas tax. And everyone I talk to in Texas about this is on board. But the funny thing is, because I'm a candidate now and I'm out here running statewide, but the funny thing is, 4 months ago, when I was calling everybody, or actually 6 months ago when we were in session, when the legislature was in session in Austin, they had this record-long session. I called everybody I could think of. I called people I went to A&M with, like Brooks Landgraf, who's a representative out here where I'm sitting. I'm sitting in his district right now. I said, Brooks, what are we going to do to eliminate the flare gas tax? And he said, you know what? There's just not enough time. We're not interested in that. Maybe we'll get to it eventually. I was blown away. I was like, wait, you're calling yourself a fiscal conservative and you don't want to eliminate this tax? So I'm doing everything I can to spur this development along and make us more efficient. And if we need to eliminate the flare gas tax to do it, well, then by all means, let's do it. Wyoming did it 2 years ago. Greg Abbott likes to walk around saying we're the number one leader in Bitcoin mining in Texas. Texas is not, because we still have this flare gas tax. And so just everybody knows real quick what the flare gas tax is. It's a tax that the government puts on gas that was being set on fire before, but if you want to do something with it, like make electricity with it, they're going to tax you. Well, if you're sitting here making electricity, you're creating a business tax in Texas, right? That's a 20% business tax. Right. So why do we need an additional tax on this flare gas if we've already got a business tax coming through?
So you're saying they still tax it, like they tax it as if it's being flared, if it's being converted to electricity? They still tax it as if
there is no tax on it if it's being flared. You can set it on fire, there's no tax. Okay. Right? But the second you start doing something with that gas, they want you to pay a severance tax on it. If you use it to make electricity, then you owe the state of Texas money. When literally before it was being set on fire, right? You were just burning it up, no tax to be paid. Right. Well, if you want to do something with a business, if you want to bring in a free market solution for this, the state of Texas is telling you you're going to have to pay an additional tax. They don't do that in Wyoming. They got rid of it. People in Wyoming are smart, all right? They're very conservative in Wyoming, and they recognize this, and they said, we want to be the nation's leader, not only in converting flare gas to electricity, but also Bitcoin mining. We're going to get ahead of the curve. We're going to eliminate this flare gas tax. So once again, we've got a leadership problem in Austin where we're behind the curve. We've been behind the curve on several topics, whether it's coronavirus or the freeze or whatever it might be, but we're behind the curve now when it comes to this flare gas tax. And like I said, I haven't talked to one Republican running for office that thinks that keeping the flare gas tax is the thing we need to do. They all want to eliminate it, just like I haven't spoken to one Republican in Texas that says that taxing Texans $3.4 billion was a good idea. I have every Republican in Texas agreeing with me on all of my talking points, and I'm the one out here pushing this stuff hard. You won't find anybody else in Texas, in the entire state, that wants to do this more than me. I'm a huge major advocate for it, right? And I'm going to continue to be an advocate for taking down flare gas and making money and adding the bottom line to our Texas state budget and adding to the bottom line for all these EMPs. They're going to make money from it, but they've got to understand how it works. And listen, Wayne goes around telling people that we've eliminated a lot of the flare gas in Texas, and we barely have any left. Let me tell you a little secret, Max, and you might know this, but the amount of flare gas that we have in Texas, that's all self-reported. So, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. Let me tell you, when I drive around West Texas, I see a lot of flares out here that were here 3 years ago. They're the same flares, all right? And they're blowing and going all the time. They're constant. They're not intermittent flares. They're constant. But even if you do have intermittent flaring, you can store that gas in a tank, and you can divvy it out over 30 days, you can have an efficient operation there. You just need to put a storage tank in there and figure out where your gas flow is going to be.
Right.
So there's lots of solutions to the flared gas that are going to come from the free market side, but we have to eliminate this tax to help spur it along. That's really what we have to do. We have to have leadership in Austin that's willing to do the right things, like cut taxes.
Yep. Yeah, it's it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it gets back to this theme around free market solutions, which is basically it's just like what I look at everything in the world as. I always try to gravitate towards things that fall in that realm, and I wonder often. It's funny. My wife asked me, she's like, "Why are people in oil and gas so negative on Bitcoin mining?" She's like, "It just seems really strange." She's like, get on Twitter and see all these people like hating on it, and I think you're a guy that at least maybe you're not a full on Bitcoiner, but you at least are understanding the implications and the positives that it can have for our industry, as well as others. I think that ERCOT and, you saw a headline from Bloomberg this week with Abbott talking about how he'd like to use Bitcoin mining to level or stabilize the grid. And people will just get on here and attack me for it. And it's like, look, I'm talking to grid operators. I'm talking to power companies. I'm talking to politicians and everybody. People are coming around to the benefits here. It's odd to me that the oil and gas industry would fight this so much, but maybe there's just kind of this stuck in their way mentality. But have you received mostly positive, negative, mixed? What's your feedback?
Yeah, I mean,
talk to people
so
about
full
Bitcoin
disclosure,
stuff?
Max, I'm the vice president of a company called Artemis, and Artemis is led by Kat Galloway.
Yep.
And she is working diligently to secure contracts with all kinds of companies that flare gas, whether it's upstream, midstream, or downstream. So we're working hard right now, and everyone we talk to, regardless of the price of Bitcoin, is interested because there are environmental aspects to this, and that has to do everything with your flaring permits and TCEQ and liability.
Right.
And when you're able to decrease their liability, it makes them money immediately. So there's a whole different factor to this equation on the midstream and downstream side, which isn't as prevalent on the upstream side. But these people are picking up on it. And they realize that there's money to be made here. But it takes a professional like Kat Galloway to step in and explain how you're going to benefit from this on your environmental permitting side and also for your investors. And so if your investors, if your company is publicly traded, or if you're having to deal with money coming out of Europe, then you're going to really want to eliminate all of your flared gas. Because when you do eliminate your flared gas, it's adding to your bottom line. But until you have someone like Kat sit down and explain this and explain all the functions of the money flowing and how this operation gets tuned up, you won't have success. And one of the problems I would say, Max, that people are kind of hesitant about is the availability of the equipment, of the ASICs, being able to get your ASICs in and get everything set up. There's lead times on this, and we've had supply chain issues because of coronavirus. And so getting your hands on all this equipment, and especially the transformers, in order to convert your electricity down and bring it to the right kilowatt and bring it to the right ohms and all that in order to make sure that your mining operation is working perfectly. Some of that equipment is hard to get your hands on. So it's a supply chain issue getting these things set up. It's not something, all this stuff isn't on the shelf ready to roll, unfortunately. So there's lead times with this. And so you have to have people that are very comfortable knowing how this project is implemented. But once you have a professional there to explain this, it works out a lot quicker. And there's numerous mining companies in Texas that are doing it right now from grid mining. And so breaking into that flare gas is a harder nut to crack. But there are people that are doing it slowly but surely. And it's just going to take a little bit longer, but it's going to happen. And really, you do a small project, you show them how it works. Here's our tiny little project with a handful of ASICs using a small amount of gas. You let that run for 6 months, and you show them, here's your money being made. And it's kind of like we got to see it to believe it. But once they see it, they're full believers. And that's how that works. Right. And it's a long process, just like anything else in oil and gas. It's not going to happen overnight. but it is going to happen. And it's going to take people with the right leadership skills that know how this Bitcoin mining and ending flare gas works in Austin to push it forward. And it's funny that Abbott and Wayne Christian for the first time showed up to a Bitcoin mine company the other day and had a photo op. He's never bothered with Bitcoin mining once in his life until Tom Slocum got in the race and started pushing all of this. And now all of a sudden Wayne Christian's a big supporter of Bitcoin mining. It's funny how that works. So I feel like I've already, even though I'm just a candidate for statewide office in Texas, I feel that what I'm saying, my message is having an impact here in the state of Texas, because my competitor in the race and even the governor himself are starting to pick up on these talking points and running with them hard because they know that this is a winning solution for Texas.
Yeah, for sure. No, everybody seems like it's hopping on the bandwagon. Our company, we can help. We've gotten into the Bitcoin space as well. We're really focusing on the supply chain stuff, ASICs. We're looking at building data centers. We've got a bunch of different irons in the fire on that front. So I didn't realize you were with Kat. I actually talked to her the other day. She seems like she really gets it. And I think you guys are doing some smart things. So, no, that's great, man. I mean, to switch at the end here, we got a few minutes left. Just kind of, this election's coming up. I mean, I'm not following it as close as people probably are in Texas. I don't even know. I know you're running. I know maybe one or two of the other candidates. I know the incumbent's going to be hard to beat. Last kind of words on, I mean, a lot of this you've woven in here, why you feel like you're the guy for the job. But kind of just your last remarks on the whole thing. And, maybe right, but yeah, go ahead. Go for it.
Yeah, I was just going to say it real fast. I've got real field experience. Wayne Christian doesn't have any. I've spent weeks, months out in the field, right? I spend at least 2 days a week out there. I try to be connected to what's going on. I know the regulations frontwards and backwards because my job depends on it. If I didn't, I would get fired. I would get run off, right? It's called getting run off in the oil field. They'd run me off in a heartbeat if I messed up. So I have to know all the regulations, frontwards and backwards. That's Title 16, Section 1, Chapter 3 of the Oil and Gas Code in Texas. I know it like the back of my hand. My job relies on it. And I've got this real-world field experience, blue-collar experience behind me that will help me when it comes to making decisions in Austin. I haven't taken a bunch of money from special interests. I really care about the people that work here in the field, and I really care about Texans, and I care about landowners too. And, there's a lot of people in Austin that really don't so much. So that's a big difference between the current incumbent and me as far as our professional background. Wayne Christian's a financial planner. And let me tell you what he's been doing. He's taken over $155,000 from a group called the High Roller Club. The High Roller Club, who are those people? It sounds like, a bad version of the movie Roadhouse, and that's exactly what it is, really. These people want to put an oil field landfill in the middle of East Texas. We have to have oil field landfills. I ship my stuff off to oil field landfills all day long. All right, Milestone, Environmental, R360, there's a bunch of good companies to choose from. But what I will never do is I will never ship my waste to the middle of the Sabine River or Toledo Bend or anywhere where it's going to impact our environment. I am definitely the most fiscally conservative person in this race. All right, I am very far right when it comes to watching our money. But I also care about our landowners because we only have so much Texas. They're not making any more of it. And we have to do everything we can to be good stewards of not only our oil and gas, but also the places where we hunt and fish, the places where we take our kids. I want to be able to go to Toledo Bend and fish there when I'm 80, 90 years old with my grandkids. I don't want to have to worry about any contamination. We got to make smart decisions. We don't need Anderson Cooper with a video camera in East Texas explaining to people how people in Texas messed up the environment because they thought it would be a good idea to put in a landfill. All right, we've got a clean house. Call me Patrick Swayze. I'm going to kick the door in. I'm the cleaner. All right, and that's what I told people in East Texas, and they understand the difference between me and Wayne. They went to high school with Wayne Christian. They all supported him in 2016. I did too. I, in fact, campaigned for Wayne Christian because I did not like his opponent. All right, Wayne was the better choice in 2016. I'm here to tell you right now, I am the best choice for Texans. And please contact me. Go to slocumfortexas.com. Find out more. If you'd like to call me, I'll even give my cell phone number here on the podcast. You can call me 432-208-2273. Or you can email me at tom@slocumfortexas.com. I always have an open door. I talk to people on LinkedIn all day long. They say, Tom, I've got some questions for you. I'm not sure about you as a candidate. I call them up. I called the gentleman up the other day, Mr. Chapman. He was critical of me on LinkedIn. I talked to him for 20 minutes. He said, sir, you got my vote. He even posted on LinkedIn on one of my posts that said, hey, I talked to Tom. I realized Tom's the real deal. So if you want the real deal, vote Tom Slocum for the Railroad Commission position, and you will get it. And I will be a fighter for everyone here to do what's right.
Love it, man. No, I mean, whatever, regardless what happens, I think you're doing, I liked a lot of your talking points. I think you're doing good work. You're getting out there, and you're putting yourself out there. And I think that I have a very hard time being critical of people that are in the public eye. I mean, I say that. If people that are like putting themselves out there that I know that are like putting themselves in the line of fire, that are trying to be the man in the arena, I have to give like a certain level of just baseline respect for that, because I know how difficult that can be. And that's how I opened out the podcast, was saying that, look, I see what you're doing, and regardless of like the Twitter joking and all these things that are going on, it's like, look, the guy's like, he's putting himself in the line of fire. Like, there's got to be a level of some respect that goes with that. And so you've got that from me, and man, I appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast, and we'll see how it goes. What's the date of the election again?
Early voting starts February 14th. Election day is March 1st. So, hey, Texas, awesome, I love you. You love me. Remember, Valentine's Day, you got to show up and vote for Tom Slocum.
All right, Tom. Take it easy, man.